Hello, my name is Farooq Sharaf. I go with he or they. I have pale skin, short brown hair, and beard. There are shelves on the background of the video. I'm a PhD candidate at CUNY Graduate Center, and my talk is entitled Oriented Towards Europe Sexual Liberation and Racialization in Berlin, Germany. Oriented Towards Europe Sexual Liberation and Racialization in Berlin, Germany. We are comfortably seated on the benches at a relaxed open-air club near the Spree, casually sipping our beers and chatting about how thrilling summers are in Berlin. I tell Max, a white straight German man in his mid-30s, whose favorite club is definitely Berghain, that I was there last Saturday. Instead of asking me about my experience, the former regular asks me how I managed to get into this sex-fueled mecca of techno music. This very emphasis on, if not the obsession about, getting in, will guide this paper. I argue that, rather counterintuitively, the local sexual liberation imaginaries which play out in Berlin's nightlife are in fact strongly connected to a racialized desire to protect the purity of presumably liberatory European values from the cultural others. I will also question the tension between liberal and oppressive as binary categories by arguing that all ideologies promise a kind of emancipation, and apparently liberal sexual attitudes can and do become instrumental for reproducing oppressive racial politics. Drawing on 8 months of ethnographic research between 2017 and 2019, this paper emphasizes the ideological links between the two fields that appear to be opposites at the first glance. The seemingly progressive local Berliner understandings of sexual liberation and the regional as well as national racial imaginaries as enacted in Berlin nightclubs. To analytically grasp these connections, I will build upon Sara Ahmed's emphasis on orientation in the phenomenological sense. Orientation as a phenomenological category makes it possible to theorize the club as an object of desire towards which the waiting line is directed. This paper contributes to debates on sexuality, racialization, and immigration in Germany, analyzing how gendered and racialized narratives about the Arab have replaced earlier constructs of the European Jew and the Holocaust as the major reference points against which German and European sexualized discourses are negotiated. This shift, I argue, can be read in light of the ongoing Europeanization of United Germany and as a result of the first direct encounter with Muslims as the new colonized subjects in Germany's adaptation to the capitalist Western bloc. Sexual politics in Germany. I honestly don't feel very comfortable around Arab men, says Maria, a 27-year-old Brazilian expat and a self-proclaimed techno-admirer. Quote, "It's just the way they look at women. It's giving me a weird feel. I can't really explain. German men are much more respectful," unquote, she claimed. For many denizens of Berlin's nightclub scene, Arab and Muslim have become interchangeable. Maria wasn't sure if it was the religion or the culture that gave her pause. Finishing her coffee before her rushing off to her highly exclusive bondage workshop, she shifts the conversation to a date she had the other week. The man she met up with allegedly told her that sexual harassment or assault had nothing to do with being Arab or Muslim, as he, as an Israeli Jew, could also assault her. So she decided that she would stop dating Israeli men too. She guessed it was about the Middle East, stressing that she was not being racist, since no doubt there were some respectful Arab men or Jewish too. She just didn't prefer to take the chance, while she had all the other options in a highly diverse cosmopolitan Berlin. Despite my very common Muslim name, my proximity to whiteness, given my status as a researcher at a North American institution, my pale complexion and fluency in specific cultural codes, exempted me from the Arab-Muslim stereotype, and I became someone Maria could confide in. We said farewell and promised to go partying together sometime soon, which never happened due to our impossible schedules. It was impressible, though, how Maria, as an expat who had not grown up with specifically German imaginaries, could so easily embrace both the historical and now mostly more subtle anti-Semitic references and the contemporary racialized notion of the sexually immature Arab man. Sexuality, an always political phenomenon, has historically been vital in creating spatial, cultural, and racial differences, and the European Orientalist imaginary of the sexually illicit and dangerous Muslim man is well documented in the literature. In her work on French Indochina and the Dutch East Indies, Anne Stoller argues that, quote, imperial authority and racial distinctions were fundamentally structured in gender terms, and the very categories of colonizer and colonized were secured through forms of sexual control, unquote. While the other West European empires, such as Great Britain, France, and the Netherlands, had their colonized Muslim counterparts all around the globe, the German Gentiles were occupied in maintaining their racial and cultural distinction from their colonized subjects with whom they lived side by side. In the German context, the sexualized other has primarily been the Jewish man. Herzog maintains that, quote, sex was a crucial theme for politics even before the Third Reich began. It was closely linked with anti-Semitism, unquote. Preceding the Third Reich by several decades then, Gentile sexuality was already situated as the healthy and proper, whereas Jews, particularly Jewish men, were demonized as sexually disturbed and contaminating. Sex is also vital for forming ideological alliances and distinctions. The relatively secularized sexual atmosphere of the Weimar era was also supported by a new cohort of German-speaking Jewish scholars' sympathetic reports on same-sex erotic desire. This challenge to conventional Christian narratives around sex conveniently solidified the well-rooted anti-Semitic alliance between the Church and the Nazis. While the sexual demonization of Jews and homosexuals peaked during the Third Reich, the Nazi sexual politics were not only repressive, nor were they merely in line with Christian values. The Nazis mocked the Church for its sexual rigidity and instead followed the Weimar era's secularized perspective to develop a proto-spiritual narrative. Sex for the Nazis was a sacred spiritual unity, vital for a healthy heterosexual racial elite, and could not be bound with marriage. The degrading erotic images of the Weimar era was simply replaced by a new kind, well connected to the idea of homeland. After the war, in turn, the Church emphasized their partially distinct sexual politics and successfully convinced the Western public that the Nazi era was essentially anti-Christian. As Herzog illustrates, a Church-sponsored post-war sexual conservatism has continuously been confused with the Nazi sexual politics, to the point that in the West Germany, the sexual revolution of 1968 framed its liberal politics as a work of denazification. Anti-Semitism was mentioned less and less as a source of National Socialism, while the 68ers saw allegedly repressive politics as the main route for oppressive politics at large. Curiously, there was still no public discussion about Muslim sexualities, despite the increasing flow of Muslim guest workers from the 60s onwards. Oriented towards liberation. Berlin's fame as a European capital for transgressive sexual mores extends back to the Weimar era. Prickett analyzes Weimar era Berlin as sexy, as in allowing self-fashioning for homosexual men in Berlin, and sexualized, meaning voyeurism and sexual exploration for Berlin's newcomers and visitors. Despite the strict homophobic violence during the Third Reich and the conservative post-war period, West Berlin maintained that fame and its vibrant nightlife flourished after the war. Male homosexuality stayed illegal in West Germany until 1968, but gay men had already found not-so-secret spaces in West Berlin. In the 1970s and 80s, the hedonist Berlin was back in full force in new forms and venues. The wall was dismantled in 1989, East and West were reunited, the West won. Meanwhile, techno music was founded in the US by black artists, and gay German men embraced it. The 1990s were the decades for techno music to become the genre of, and for techno spaces to become the venues for sex parties in the German reunited capital. Two well-known promoters of the 1990s male-only fetish party, Snacks, turned a former power plant in former East Berlin into a monumental nightclub, and named it after the two neighboring districts of Kreuzberg and Friedrichshain. As the mecca of European techno music since 2004, now straight-friendly Berghain is known for its Friday night to Monday morning parties filled with psychedelic drugs and transgressive sex. The all-gender bathroom cabins are designed to fit 6 people at a time, with no mirrors to reflect the tripping faces and exhausted bodies so as not to disturb the mood. I was on the Berghain's guest list for Karim's 31st birthday, thanks to our mutual friend Anna. The others had arrived early, so I told the bouncer whose list I was on and got into the club to meet with Karim, Anna, and 2 other male Arab friends in the backyard. Karim began ranting right away. Quote, "So we all walked to the guest list entrance and I told the bouncer that we were on the guest list. He turned to Anna to ask where she knew us from, as if I was a child and he was talking to my mom." Unquote. Anna told the bouncer that they were her friends and had come to celebrate a birthday, to hear that, quote, her friends didn't look like Berghain people and that they could be harmful to the vibe inside, unquote. The bouncer would let them in, but Anna had to take responsibility for their attitude inside. They all were fluent in German and on the list. It was Karim's birthday, who initially talked to the bouncer, but the bouncer did not even communicate until he found a white German woman in the group. We were all in after all, but it took a while before we gained our joy and hop on the dark dance floor. If it weren't for the guest list, a dialogue would not even have taken place. I had become a Berghain regular before my research took shape. As a white-passing queer techno admirer, I could easily master the dress code and had no issue getting in. I had recently started working with a group of Syrian refugee men to learn about their perspectives on dating, sexuality, and eroticism in Berlin, and I knew that a good portion of my interlocutors loved partying. The lack of brown men in the club, though, was glaringly obvious to me. I remembered my friend Musin, a 32-year-old Syrian man, stressing how captivating the gaze was wherever he would go. Quote, "Even when I go to a kebab place, every white person is looking at me suspiciously," unquote. The degree to which this perception is a projection, as in the case of Vincent Crapanzano's analysis of the Harkeys in France, is beyond the scope of this paper. Something is clear though. The bouncers and several partygoers have strongly associated the Middle East with patriarchy, sexual oppression, and homophobia, against which Berghain's doors protect those inside. Curiously, the most common Google inquiries for Berghain are, "Can I get into Berghain? Is it really that hard to get into Berghain? And what is so special about Berghain?" There is even a website dedicated to interactive training videos on how to get in. It is telling that the long-term charismatic bouncer, Sven Marquardt, is more popular than most of the resident artists. Sara Ahmed's emphasis on directionality as a guiding principle in understanding sexual desire and heteronormativity offers some tools to analyze what the club door stands for. Ahmed asserts that to understand sexual orientation, one must understand orientation literally, as in being directed towards something. The object of desire, in other words, is what we turn our faces toward. The more people walk in the same direction, the clearer and better developed the path gets. Normativity in this paradigm is strong because the path feels like the only one. Everyone seems to be going in the same direction, and the crowds are pushing you along the one-way path. Moreover, the well-trodden path promises happiness, and families just want their children to be happy. Being outside of the given path or facing any other direction means regret and sorrow. How then can Ahmed's analysis of heteronormativity help to shed light upon the door policy of a non-normative club? Doesn't Berghain's door policy sound more like the story of the faggots and their friends between revolutions? A tale of the oppressed developing a haven to give each other support, care, and compassion. Berghain's queue is as long as it is infamous. On Virtual Berghain, a popular Facebook page with about 50,000 international members, there are polls to debate whether a given famous DJ would be allowed in. In several threads, members discuss their waiting and being turned down stories. The Chicago-based black techno giant Felix the house cat has a long Twitter thread attacking the bouncers for turning him down at the door, despite, as he says, "I founded this music," unquote. At a techno festival in the Netherlands, the organizers set up a mock Berghain facade with a queue but no entry. People from all around Europe wait outside for hours on every given Saturday night. Techno-tourism has become an integral part of the city, while tens of thousands taking EasyJet flights from London, Paris, Madrid, or Copenhagen to feel at home in Berlin. As of 2021, techno clubs in Berlin have officially become high culture venues instead of entertainment spaces, now occupying the same status with the Berlin Philharmonic. They are now the contemporary face of sexy and sexualized Berlins. Imagining the playground. I met Ari, a 29-year-old Israeli woman who travels to Europe very often, at an international BDSM meetup in a rather posh pub. She talked at length about her last vacation to Egypt, after which she needed another vacation to recover. She said, quote, "I have always been very sexual. I don't remember a time my libido was low. But man, Egypt was horrible. It was dirty. They don't even have clean tap water. And men, ugh, what a turnoff. Of course I had to come to Europe to feel sexy again," unquote. Ari's bluntly racist language is not representative of politically correct Berliners, but her emphasis on clean and sexy Europe as opposed to dirty and unsexy Egypt is worth pondering. According to Thomas Rogers of Rolling Stones magazine, quote, "To enter Berghain is a religious experience," unquote. To an anthropologist, the line of Berghain appears as a liminal space, promising entrance to a ritualistic experience which is out of the ordinary. It is indeed out of the ordinary, capitalist, moralist, normative world, and provides participants an opportunity to explore and play. I emphasize play with its larger definition to capture the in-betweenness. Play is an imagined space-time, liberated from strict roles and expectations of the real life, yet is informed by and have the potential to transform the real experiences. Maurice Godelier's distinction between the imagined and the imaginary offers another path toward analyzing this complex dynamic. Godelier focuses on the distinction between the imagined and the imaginary to argue that not everything imagined is imaginary, so long as the imagined phenomenon has real components in it. For instance, playing doctor for children or imagining a loved one who is not currently present. To play doctor, the players must know the dynamics between a doctor and a patient and possibly a nurse too, or the imagined loved one exists somewhere, and Berghain exists just there, behind the door. Although not everyone is allowed in every game. One must fulfill the expectations, follow the necessary cultural codes, rules and regulations, and their fluency must be acknowledged by the other players. In David Dietl's documentary Berlin Bouncer, one famous bouncer states that it's all about creating the right atmosphere in the club. Every night is another creation. We can argue further that every door policy is based on assessing the cultural or subcultural fluency, hence belonging to the space. In other words, the bouncer's imagination about what is desirable on the inside relies on excluding what must be kept outside. Reiterating Foucault's cynical statement that the society must be defended, the bouncers are there to defend who they consider belonging to the club from the contaminating components of the outside. In this context, brown men who are primarily racialized as Muslims have become the natural outsiders of the presumably sexually liberated European identity, as immigration literature on France, the Netherlands, and Germany already suggests. The sexual assaults in Cologne, for instance, on New Year's Eve 2015, started a heated discussion about sexually immature immigrant men and even shifted the public perception in Germany from a refugee-friendly attitude to xenophobia. Refugee applicants are now given questionnaires regarding their attitude towards gender equality and homosexuality, a policy which clearly targets immigrants from Muslim-majority countries. Borders are performative. The narrative of homophobic and patriarchal others helped produce this tale of sexually liberal we Europeans. According to this narrative, not only the distinction between oppressive versus liberal is created, but also the naturalized distinction between the us and the others. Conclusions. As the reunited German Republic has integrated into the rest of capitalist Western bloc, Jews and the Holocaust lost their significance in German sexual politics, and Muslims have become the new colonial others. Discourses on sexual democracy and its Muslim others have shifted towards the existing ones in France, Britain, and Netherlands, and the official European Union belonging policies, while reunited Germany is oriented towards Europe at large. Berlin's techno scene has turned into the capital of European sexual liberation narratives. In this context, the club must be understood as what it comes to stand for: a home for Europeans, strictly against homophobia, sexual oppression, and patriarchy. Maria, Ari, and countless others pursue this identity. The racialized door policy, in turn, provides a sterile playground to explore with little to no threat of contamination. The club doors then act as proxies for the Europe's borders in the literal sense, towards which the desire of belonging to Europe is created.